Well, this request asks for a quick tip on gradation of the brilliant colors of the sky when the sun is setting. We've got gradation there and we've got brilliant colors. Let's see if we can do that. I believe that the most misused and misunderstood characteristic of color is saturation. The reason I say that is I see so many paintings that are just too saturated. There's too much color there. There's a lot of brilliance. The person thinks they see the colors that brilliant, that saturated. But really, nature is not as saturated as we think. And that goes for the sunsets that we see. Those brilliant colors we'll see in a really brilliant sky, and where the sunset has really just broken into color all over the place. So let's address that first, and then let's address the technique that we might use to make that happen, the gradation technique. First of all, read the hues you see. Don't just assume it's orange or pink or whatever single color your head might tell you it is, but isolate the hues you see. A good way to do that, guess what? Color wheel. My color wheel. I always refer to the color wheel. So if I put the color wheel up on this photo, now this photo is a little bit too saturated. Speaking of saturation, my printer did that, and printers will often do that. Plus, I do believe that the photo was photoshopped perhaps a bit before it was put on Pixabay, where I get most of these photos for these quick tips. Nevertheless, we will use what we see here. And so I see some yellow right here, and we usually will. I won't say you always do. There is no always, because you're going to see all kinds of variations. But I see some yellow right in here. And so there's yellow on the color wheel. I also see some yellow-orange right next to it, right there. And then I see it going into an orange or more of a red-orange that we see right here. I also see it going into red-violet. Do you see that? Now, usually when you're really looking at the sky, you might see that red-violet more defined as red-violet, and sometimes you might see it a very dull red-violet. And so if you identify those, let me show you. Now, let's say I see yellow, and then I look more closely at that yellow, and I see it really is leaning more towards yellow-orange. You see this right here? That's the hue, yellow-orange, but it's not as saturated as this yellow-orange. So here's how we can manage that. I've pulled the saturate, I'll pull the yellow-orange down. Now, if you do this kind of analysis of the colors you're looking at, and then get the saturation of those colors right before you start, then you'll have it. If you try to just guess at it as you're painting, you're going to get all frustrated. You might hit it, might miss it. So that's the yellow-orange. Now, according to the color, the traditional color will always show you the complement on the opposite side. You see blue-violet as the complement of yellow-orange. Now, first of all, I want to show you. If I get this whole yellow-orange here, you can see it's a little darker and not quite as saturated. Well, a little darker first. So I'm going to bring, that tells me it needs to be a little lighter. So I'm going to bring some of that yellow-orange into this white right here. And we're going to get the value first. Now, let's see if I got that is in a little bit more of the yellow-orange. But you see, when I do that and I compare it with the back of my palette knife, we can see that that's just a little bit too saturated. Now I'll get some gradation of that going right here. You see, no matter what I do, I can go back and forth with that white and it's still too saturated. So what I will do there is what I just said. I will go to the blue-violet and I'll add some blue-violet in. Let me show you. This is the trick. I've got ultramarine blue right here, and I'm just going to put it right here. And it's not quite blue violet. It is a blue that leans a little bit more towards blue violet. I'm going to add a little bit of red violet into it to switch it over and have it more blue violet. And I can see there that seems to be more in the blue violet range. Now, if I put that into this, it's going to go wacky. It's going to go way too dark. It's not going to work. So what I'll do is this. I'll put this right here. I'll bring some white over, and I'll get this the same value. So it's value correct first. And I can see now that I have got that blue violet. So let's get this in the same value range. Right there. Like that. Now, let's try it. Let's add a tiny bit. Go a little bit at a time. Don't just plop a whole bunch in. But a little bit at a time. Add into here. And mix it in. And now let's check it. You see it is desaturated very slightly. And you see, well, it's still a little bit light. So let's desaturate that. And now let's see what we have. How close are we to that yellow orange that we're seeing? We're getting very, very close to that yellow orange we're seeing. A little bit more desaturation. Just a little bit more desaturation. And we can see really that ends up being closer to, closer actually to a yellow ochre, but I see a little bit more red in that. Now let's do the same thing. Let's bring the red over. Let's put it right here. And let's add a little white to it. And get it closer in value. There we go. Can you see how this gets closer in value? And let's add a little bit of that in here now. And you see I'm adjusting hue and saturation. And you see there I have it. And that, you see how I worked that out? You start out with the hue that you read, and then as you mix and compare, your comparison, when you train your eye to see that way, train your eye to see hue differences and saturation differences, then your eye is going to guide you. So that's where I need to be, right in there for that part. What about now going into this part right here? That looks like it might be a red orange, and I use the cadmium red light here, which is a red orange. So let's start there and see what we get. You see that's very, very close right there, and that red orange has enough white in it that I believe that is the red orange we're looking at. Now if you see this comes down, as it comes down it has a little bit of violet in it, of red violet. So let's see what we will do there. Let's get that red violet. This is red violet. This is called quinacridone violet. My red violet here. Change the value. Get the value to the value you're looking at for the red violet. Let's see. Is that the same value? Pretty close. It's in the same value range, but did you notice it is just not quite desaturated enough? All right. I said red, orange, blue, green. All right, the blue-green tells me that if I, well, and this may sound contorted, when I say blue-green, that means I need blue and a little yellow in it to make it blue-green. There we go, right in here, I have blue-green. Now, if I get that blue-green, same value. See what I'm doing here? I'm following a pattern. I read the hue, then I get the value of that hue, and then we'll use that to get the saturation. Now let's put just a little bit of this in here and see if that doesn't desaturate it to exactly what we're looking at. I didn't put much, just a little bit. You see how close that is. Maybe take just a little bit more red in it, in the red violet. And there, we're in that same ballpark. A little bit more of the green, get that desaturated, the blue-green. So you see now I've got 3 hues that I see in that area. To keep the quick tip from going on forever and ever now, you would continue that process of analyzing the color and the value of that color that you see, and analyze the saturation, or adjust the saturation. You can actually mix on your palette those saturations and those values as your eye progresses from one hue in the sky to another, and then you're ready to go. So the next question then is about the gradation. The person asked for the colors and the gradations. And so we might start that gradation anywhere. We could start it with the yellow. I'll just do the gradation in the sequence that I see it here. For the gradation of this particular smooth sky that you see in this area right here, we have it very smooth. So when you have a very smooth area and you're not trying to do an impasto technique, or you're not trying to do an impressionist technique, but you're simply trying to translate what you see, or you might say interpret what you see, then a bristle filbert, not a synthetic, but just a bristle filbert is really, really good for doing that. And we use a motion for that kind of gradation of using this portion right here of that filbert, the portion of the belly of the filbert, with an angle of the brush about like this, and kind of a scrubbing motion. Now here's what I'm talking about. So I'm going to load that area of my brush with that color that I analyzed right there. Now to apply that, I'll just put it right here. To apply that, I can then use a scrubbing motion like this and scrub the paint, have enough paint on that brush so that it covers the canvas, but not a whole lot, not so much that I can't control it. So that's one of the keys for getting a really smooth gradation, is to control the amount of paint that you put on the brush and that you put on the canvas to begin with. And so you see there, see how much of the brush I loaded, and you see this is the technique. Now this is what this person is asking for, a technique of gradating. Gradate means gradual change. One thing changes to another, but there you can't see a demarcation where the change takes place. That's gradate. It's a type of blending, visual blending, and we do that blending with the brush. So I'm now going to move into the next hue, the next color. That's this one. And then I'm going to pick that up. And I didn't wash the brush. You don't have to, because you're dealing with a gradation of the same, of those two colors, the two there on the brush now. And so then I can begin to work that into that area. Now be careful how much I pick up, and look at just how much of that do I see. I can work that into that area. Now if it has some variation, for example, if it needs to be a little bit lighter, I'll pick up a little white as I'm doing that. And let's see what that does. Yes, there we go. And now I'll move the brush as I'm moving that across the canvas like that with a scrubbing motion. You see, I put a slight bend, slight push, not too much, not that much, just a slight tug of the brush against the canvas. And then I will just use a scrubbing motion in between those and move back and forth, and then turn it to the side just a little bit, back in this direction, and move back in this direction, and do that blending and lift up on the pressure as I move up into the other color. And you see I get that smooth gradation. You see already now we're beginning to get those colors we see in that sky. And then we continue to add the color as we see it progress. Continue to add the color, and you see how one color and then moves right into the other. And I'm going to get that just a little bit on the clean paper towel here. We'll get that really smooth gradation in here. As I did that, I noticed that this feels now, in relation to that, a tiny bit lighter. So what I'll do is I'll move a little bit of white, and just work a little bit of white and work that in the same way. Just touch it, barely touch it, and just scrub it back and forth like that, and let it gradate. Let it gradate both directions, up and down. And you see then you can get that. Then I will move from that color. I'll pick up this the red-orange color, move it gradually into the violet, and then you see the violet does get darker. And so then I will begin to scrub the violet in and do the same thing. So let it be, as it moves up, let it blend as it moves up. As you move it up, see, like this, just keep working back and forth as you move up. Get it, and when you get it blended, stop blending, because if you overdo that, you get the whole thing too blended, and it won't work. And you can see how you can keep that. Now put just a little bit of that red back in there, and get it blended right here. Get that sort of emphasis on the red. So as you see the variation, you can add that variation in. You see how that works? So there's your blending, the gradation technique for getting those smooth colors. There's your guidance for coming up with the colors that you actually see. All we need now is for you to practice it and master it. Be sure and view all of our quick tips. And while you're doing so, subscribe to the channel, click on the bell so you'll always get a notice when we produce a new quick tip, which is every week. And if you have a question, leave it in the comments section and we'll make a quick tip for you. Also, take a trip over to DyingMinds.com where I have full-length lessons, downloads, DVDs, lots of other stuff there, some free stuff for you. And while you're there, you can subscribe to the newsletter, and that way you'll always be informed every time we do something new.